Okay, hello. My name is Amy Glass, and I'm the Instruction Services Librarian at Illinois Central College, and I'm also the coordinator of the ICC Library One Book, One College program. And I'd like to welcome you all to All of Us Should Meet Karen McManus, our presentation for today. A little bit about the One Book, One College program. It fosters interdisciplinary relationships through a shared reading experience. It's a year-long interdisciplinary program engaging the Illinois Central College community through the reading and discussion of a shared
Yeah,
book.
read your directions
The
on your
book
paper.
for this year is One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus. This book has been called Pretty Little Liars Meets The Breakfast Club by Entertainment Weekly magazine and Flat Out Addictive by RT Book Reviews. Set at the fictional Bayview High School, it's a story of what happens when 5 students walk into detention and only 4 walk out alive. Throughout this murder mystery are a variety of topics and themes such as the power of social media, abusive relationships, and mental health. The author of One of Us is Lying, Karen McManus, lives in Massachusetts and holds a master's degree in journalism from Northeastern University. She specializes in young adult thrillers, including Two Can Keep a Secret, The Cousins, You'll Be the Death of Me, and her latest, Nothing More to Tell, coming this August. Her books have topped the New York Times and USA Today bestseller lists. And a note for our participants, this session is being recorded. All participants will be muted. If you want to ask a question, feel free to turn on your microphone. Please state your name and your question when you ask your question. And at the end of the session, there will be an email feedback form emailed to you. So at this point in time, I'd like to welcome Karen McManus.
Thanks so much. Thanks, first of all, for having me. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I think this is a terrific program in general, and I'm excited that my book was selected. So I'm here to speak with you about this book in particular, but also my other books in general, my path to publication. And then I'm mostly interested in taking any questions you might have, because for me, that's always the most interesting part of any session. But let me get started first and tell you a little bit about my books. So as, it's not advancing. Let me try again. There we go. As Amy mentioned, I write young adult thrillers, and I am published by Delacorte Press, which is an imprint of Random House children's books. So I have 7 different books in various stages of publication, actually 8, but one of them is not far enough along to capture here. And I'm best known for my first book, which is the one that was selected for this program, One of Us is Lying, which is my debut novel. And it is the story of 5 students who walk into detention, but only 4 walk out. And the student who died was the creator of a notorious gossip app. And as it turns out, he was about to spill life-changing secrets on the other 4 students who were in the room. So when investigators learned that his death wasn't an accident, they go from being witnesses to suspects in what is now a murder investigation. And the secrets that they tried so hard to keep are now suddenly out in the open, and they need to deal with the fallout from that while also trying to solve what really happened that day. I've also written a sequel to that book called One of Us is Next, and I'm working on a 3rd book in the series called One of Us is Back, which will come out in 2023. I also write standalone novels. Two Can Keep a Secret is the story of a small town with a tragic past where history might be repeating itself. The Cousins is, not surprisingly, about 3 cousins who visit their estranged grandmother during one summer and learn some very dark secrets about their family. You'll Be the Death of Me is about 3 estranged friends who skip school and get caught up in a crime involving one of their classmates. And Nothing More to Tell, which is coming this summer, is about a teen journalist who is investigating the cold case murder of her favorite teacher, whose body was found by her ex-best friend. My books have been translated into 42 languages, and you can see all the current covers here. We're still waiting for one, from Armenia for One of Us is Lying. A lot of countries take the US cover and they just translate the title or maybe change up the graphics a little bit, but other than that, it looks pretty much the same. Others go in their own direction. The UK, which you can see kind of at the bottom left there, these are alphabetical, came up with a design that I personally love. It's this very clean, crisp, white with red lettering, and a lot of other European countries have done something similar. So Croatia, Denmark, Slovakia, just to name a few. And then some other publishers just go in a completely different direction. Some of my favorites are Japan and Vietnam because they're so colorful and they almost look like graphic novels. It's really up to the publisher and what they think will work well in their market. Some publishers I have really close relationships with, the UK and Germany, for example. I have editors there, I have publicists, I've been brought there to tour. I speak to them almost as often as I speak to my team in the US. And then there are other publishers where we don't have quite as much connection, but I may have met them in person, or I've done marketing for them or been part of a sales meeting. And then there are some who I have never heard from. I don't even know when their version of my book is being published until somebody tags me on social media with it. So it really runs the gamut, but it's been a thrill to see my words translated into so many different languages and to hear from readers from all around the world. I've also contributed to a couple of short story anthologies. My first short story was in an anthology called Up All Night. And the unifying theme here is that all the stories take place between sunset and sunrise. So I wrote a very short thriller that was published last summer in that. And I'm going to be part of an anthology that's coming up in September that was commissioned by the Agatha Christie estate with a lot of thriller authors to develop short stories featuring Jane Marple, who is Miss Marple, one of Agatha Christie's best known detectives. And I'm a huge Agatha Christie fan. She is very influential in my mystery writing. So I was really thrilled to have the opportunity to contribute to this anthology. And that will be coming out in September. And I think the cover reveal is happening in like a month or so. So I'm looking forward to that. One of Us is Lying has been turned into a television series by Universal that is streaming now on Peacock, which is a relatively new streamer that launched last spring, I think. So you may have seen it. I'm going to play the trailer real quick. So that's available now if you have Peacock. It was an interesting experience, you know, going from book to screen takes some time. And in this particular case, we had just gotten to the point of shooting the pilot. They just ordered a pilot, not the full series, which sometimes is what happens, in Vancouver in November 2019. And then, you know, pandemic happened. Everything went on hold. In particular, the film industry went on hold because you know, there was just not a safe way that anyone knew of to get people together in the way that you need to film a TV show. So everything went on hold for a while. Eventually they did greenlight the full series, and it was ultimately shot in New Zealand because New Zealand was doing a fantastic job of containing the virus. It was doing such a good job that everybody was filming there, and all the crews were like tripping over each other, you know, trying to get access to what they needed. But they did get it done. It premiered last October. It was just announced that there will be a second season, and no air date yet, but it may be in the fall. And it is also going to be distributed internationally by Netflix, and that will start on February 18th, so pretty soon. Okay, so just to tell you a little bit about my path to publication. I was one of those kids who started writing at a really young age. I was 8 years old when I wrote my first story. It was about a witch who couldn't cast spells. And I wrote all through grade school, middle school, up through high school. And then as I got a little bit older, for one thing, I had other interests, but also it got harder to write the sort of books that I wanted to write. I wanted to do things that were longer and more complicated. And my ability really didn't match that goal. And I did not know any other writers. I didn't know anyone who was an author. And I didn't really have any support in my life to pursue this as a career. It was one of those things that, nobody really thought would ever pay me. So it became something that I just sort of put to the side, like you put a lot of childhood hobbies to the side when you get older. When I was 18, and I went off to college and then to graduate school and had a career in communications, worked in PR, worked in marketing, got married, had a child, and all good things. But I really didn't think at all about creative writing. I didn't plan to go back to it. I didn't think of it again as like a career that I could have done at some point. It was just this thing that I used to do when I was a kid. But then one day I was taking a business trip to Portland, Oregon. And I live in Boston, so that's a cross-country flight. And I had nothing to read. So I went into the airport bookstore and I just grabbed what they had on display, which happened to be The Hunger Games. And it would not be an exaggeration to say that this book changed my entire life. I read it in that 7 hours on the plane in one sitting. I loved it and I got a little obsessed with it. I read it multiple times, loved the story, the voice, the characters, the concept. And for the first time in a long time, I was inspired to write again. And I just sort of sat down and started creating what ultimately turned out to be a book. Not a good one. It was kind of a very tame ripoff of The Hunger Games, really, which is sometimes what you do when you're first writing. You kind of emulate what you admire. So I wrote this book and then I did not know what to do with it. I didn't realize that it wasn't very good at that point. And so I literally Googled how to publish a book. And that was when I learned you need a literary agent to do that. I can't send my books to Random House. They won't look at them. And to get a literary agent, you have to query them. And that involves sending them a letter explaining your book. And if they're interested, they will ask you to send their book. What happens more often is that you never hear back from them or you get a form rejection. And that is what happened to me 75 times with this first book that I wrote. Nobody was interested in that book and they were right because it was terrible. But I had a lot of fun writing it. And I started to meet other writers on social media, which was not a thing when I was in high school, which was a fantastic way to connect with other people at the same stage of the journey as me. So for the first time, I had, colleagues in a way. I had people to exchange work with and to brainstorm with and to talk about the industry with. And so I wrote a second book, realizing that this first one wasn't going to go anywhere. Wrote a second one. It was better, got more interest, heard from some agents who wanted to see more, but all of them said the same thing, which was kind of, we don't know where this fits in the industry, it's important. You have to know what shelf a book is going to be on. This was a weird mashup of genres. But we'd like to see, maybe your next thing. So I knew I was getting better. And that book, I think I sent out 50, 60 queries and again, nothing. So at this point, we're at 125, attempts at getting published and all rejections. And then I got the idea for One of Us is Lying. And everything was different about this book, from the very beginning. I wrote it pretty quickly for one thing. And then when I started to query it, I had done a lot more research about the kind of agents I hoped to work with. And so I sent it to a very small group, almost all of whom wanted to see it right away. My agent, who I work with now, contacted me within an hour. And she wanted to represent me with that book. And then she sold it within a couple weeks. So it was just night and day from what I had experienced before. And the really great closed loop about all of this is that my agent also represents the author of The Hunger Games. So it was a real, it was kind of a closed loop, which was great. So One of Us is Lying became a breakout book in a way that really nobody expected, not me, not my publisher. Usually in publishing, you have kind of an idea of what the big books are going to be. You'll see the film rights might sell in like a really splashy deal before the book is even out, and the author gets invited everywhere. Everyone's just talking about it. We all hear it. That wasn't the case with this book. This was a very organic success. It was very reader driven. It sort of grew kind of slowly over time. It didn't hit the bestseller list right away, took a month. So as a writer, that was a pretty surreal thing to watch. And I call it my unicorn book because it does things that books are not supposed to do, that they don't typically do. It just celebrated 4 years on the New York Times bestseller list. And I mean, usually, as an author, you're happy to be there for a week. If you're there for 4 weeks, that's amazing. I've spent months with other books and I'm thrilled with that, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to what this book did. And it's hard to say, even for me sometimes, what it is about this book that has appealed to people. I do think the characters are a big part in it. All of the characters, there are 4 of them. For one thing, it sort of helps to have multiple characters because there's someone that anyone can identify with, hopefully. They're all very flawed. They all go through journeys where they are figuring out who they are and, how they can maybe be better than who they've been so far. They've all made mistakes that they're trying to fix. And they're all facing issues that, I think a lot of my readers could identify with. So whatever the reason, this book did change my life. And it did allow me to become a full-time author in 2018, which I have been since then. So to tell you a little bit about my writing process, the most common question that I get is where my ideas come from. And sometimes that's easy to answer because there really is a moment where you get the idea. And One of Us is Lying is a book like that. I was driving to work and the theme song from The Breakfast Club came on, Don't You Forget About Me. And I like that song, so I turned it up. And I was thinking about how the theme behind The Breakfast Club, that if you bring together people who seem like they have nothing in common on the surface, but you force them to interact, sometimes putting them through a difficult situation where they have to rely on one another, they realize that they're not so different after all. And I started to think it would be interesting to do kind of an update on that, but with a dark twist. And I spent the rest of my commute thinking, well, how could someone commit a crime in a classroom and nobody would know that they'd done it? And I came up with a possibility. And then I thought, well, why would you do that? Why would anybody do that? And then the character started to take shape. And I spent most of my day when I was supposed to be working thinking about these characters, about Bronwyn and Cooper and Addie and Nate and Simon. All of them, came to me at different points of that day. And when I got home, I started writing. So that was, clear as a bell. I remember where that idea came from. The Cousins, my 4th book, was similar. I was reading a magazine article about the Kennedy grandchildren. And, the Kennedys, of course, are a political dynasty. And a lot of the grandchildren, the late teens to later 20s, are doing some really interesting things in politics or entertainment or sports. And I started thinking or wondering what it would be like to have that kind of name that opens a door before you even knock on it. And then I wondered, what would it be like if that got taken away from you and you didn't know why, and then you had a chance to get it back. And so that was another idea that just sort of, it's very crystal clear in my mind when I got it. It's not always that simple though. With You'll Be the Death of Me, I was on tour for One of Us is Lying in Ireland with some other young adult authors, and they were joking that I should just add murder to all of the 80s movies because One of Us is Lying was being called The Breakfast Club with murder. So like 16 Candles with murder. And I don't remember if someone said Ferris Bueller's Day Off or if I just thought it, but I remember thinking that could actually work as a book that I would write because it starts with someone doing something they shouldn't. And that's a good jumping off point for a murder mystery. But that was it. There was no full idea that came to me. It was just like this little seed of something that I kind of tucked in the back of my mind. And I didn't really think about it again for like 2.5 years. So over the course of my career, which is now, going on 7 years or so, I've come to realize I basically have 2 different types of ideas, and I call them the bolt of lightning and the seedling. And the bolt of lightning is One of Us is Lying or The Cousins. It comes to me sort of in a flash, almost all at once. You still have to figure out the finer points, but for the most part, I know what the story is. I just have to get it out and I have to refine it. Seedling is different, it needs time, it needs space, it needs like nurturing. I don't know exactly at the beginning what it's going to look like. But when I was a very new writer, just after turning in One of Us is Lying and having a 2-book contract and needing to write another book, I didn't know that I got different types of ideas. And so I had a little idea for Two Can Keep a Secret. And the idea was, there's a town and something bad happened and it might be happening again. But I didn't know what the thing was. I didn't know why it was happening. I didn't know who did it. But I thought that it would probably come to me if I just sat down and wrote it. So that's what I did. I sat down, I wrote 60,000 words of absolute garbage. It was a terrible book. It was not, the characters were flat. It didn't make sense. The mystery was boring. Looking back, I kind of can't believe I wrote all of that. I don't know why it didn't occur to me how badly it was going. The only thing I can say is I was a brand new writer and still figuring out. So I threw that draft out, couldn't use it, didn't even want to show it to anyone. Started over, did the exact same thing, wrote another terrible book just with a different ending. And this is the point where I bring in my agent and say, I don't know if I can do this. As it turns out, it's just not working. And we started peeling back. Well, what about this idea appealed to you in the beginning? And after volleying that back and forth for a while, I finally realized that this story was about generational trauma. It was about the ripple effects of tragedy. That was what I wanted to write about at its core. And once I identified that and defined that, I was able to take a step back and really think through these characters who were so murky to me before, and what they want, what they're afraid of, what their goals are. And so I did a whole worksheet on all of them to really feel like I knew them before I started writing. And I also started looking into screenwriting tools. I started using something called a beat sheet, which is, it's called that because all stories have beats. They have moments like inciting incident at the beginning when things go in a new direction, or your midpoint when there's no turning back, or your climax. So you need to sort of know generally what the beats of a story are, what your audience expects, so that you can create something that, sort of meets those expectations, even as you tweak them. And a beat sheet will help you know sort of where those moments need to go, but also it helps you kind of figure out a map from getting from one to the other. What happens between the beats? What are the character moments that you're creating? So I started creating one of those for this book. And then I also found that screenwriting is incredibly helpful for character development, especially because I write ensembles, and film and TV has a lot of great tropes related to ensembles that are very useful for novels as well. For example, there's something called a power trio, right? That has a realist, a cynic, and an optimist, which are very broad personality types. When you put them together, there's lots of conflict. There's lots of connection. There's comedy sometimes. There's angst. There's a lot you can do with those different types. And so I think about that. I think about how I can create this very dynamic group. And then I outlined in great detail what this mystery would look like and how it would unfold. And when I sat down to write this book for the third time, I was actually really happy with how it turned out. So now this is simply my process, because I don't know when I first get an idea if it's a bolt of lightning or a seedling. So I just do the same thing no matter how strong the idea seems. And that's helpful even when the idea is strong, because at this point I have, 5, 6 books going in various phases. I have to sometimes stop, go do something else, come back to it. So it really helps me to have something that's pretty structured and rigorous so that I can easily slip in and out of it. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then I would love to take questions, we'll have plenty of time for that, is a little bit more about the business of books, because I talked to you all about having an agent, getting an agent. It's a big part of it. Your agent sells your books to a publisher, or they try to. They don't always succeed. Some books don't sell. But if yours does, then you have an editor. And the first thing an editor does after introducing you and maybe sending you a bunch of their books, so you get a sense of, who else they've worked on, what kind of books they work on, they send you an edit letter. And that is just a lengthy, maybe 10 single space pages of everything you need to change in your book, which can be wildly intimidating, because here you are, you've already worked so hard on this book. You love your book. Your editor loves your book, or she or he would not have bought it, but you have to change all of this stuff. And it's just a lot. So I typically read through my edit letter and then I put it aside for 2 days and I let myself just feel all the feelings about, how sad I am that my book is not perfect. And then when that time is over, I realize my editor is brilliant and right, and this is going to make it much better. So we go through what's called developmental edits, and that is big picture stuff, like adding plot lines, taking them out, figuring out if the character arcs are right. Do you need to add characters? Do you need to take them out? Should you change your ending? Really big things like that. And you do 2 to 3 rounds of that, depending on, how much work the book needs. And then you move down to more the scene level. Is every scene working as hard as it can? Is it doing what you want it to do? Is it compelling? Are the transitions between scenes seamless? Is it a smooth read? And your editor is still with you for that. And then once you're both kind of pretty happy with where that story is, you go into copy edits. And that's where somebody reads through your book with a fine-tooth comb and catches all of your mistakes, your typos, your inconsistencies. This is the point where I realize I will never use farther and further correctly. It's just, I know what they are, but I just get them wrong every time. It's very humbling. This is also the point where I personally read my books out loud, the whole book, because A, it helps me catch more mistakes, maybe beyond what the copy editor even caught, but B, it helps me make sure that the dialogue sounds right, that it sounds the way that people actually talk. And there's still, at this point, there's still room to make like big changes if you need to make them. So they read, I read, and then it goes to the final phase, which is pass pages. And that's when your publisher essentially lays the entire thing out and you all read it again. So what I tell any aspiring author is to write what you love, because you will spend years with it. And this is me doing pass pages for nothing more to tell in my office. I got the idea for this book in 2019-ish. I started writing it in the spring of 2020. And I just finished past pages in January 2022. So, less than 3 weeks ago. So there's all that time from start to finish. I've written probably 12 drafts of this book. But I'm not done, because once, it goes to my publisher, they print it, they distribute it, it goes to bookstores, but we have to get ready to launch it. I have to do interviews, publicity, social media. Have to get ready to talk about it during launch, and then hopefully after launch for the life of the book. So with One of Us is Lying, for example, I got the idea for that in September 2015. So we're going on 7 years and I am still talking about it. And ideally, that's what you want. You want a book to continue to live on after it leaves your hands and gets into the hands of readers, and they have the opportunity to interpret it, to bring their own experiences and perceptions to the page. And that way, it hopefully just continues to evolve even when your part is done. So with that, I am done and will happily take any questions that anyone has.
Does anyone here have any questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you do.
I have a question. I'd like to know if you say that screenwriting really helped you. Why aren't you writing, screen scripts and then still doing prose?
Because I love writing books. That is my, it was my dream job from the time I was a little kid, and it's still my dream job. So I have definitely thought about it. I've had 3 books optioned for film, one of which has made it to a series, One of Us is Lying, one of which made it to the script point and didn't go any further, and one of which is in development right now, and we're actually working on a pilot. And I'm not writing any of those, and I have definitely thought about it. I've been asked to do it, which I appreciate. but I haven't felt like I could take the mental energy away from books. So it's certainly something I may do at some point, but it's also a very different kind of writing. So I definitely would need to, just develop a whole new skill set. The way that you have to make every single word count in screenplays, and how much has to come across visually versus all the room you have in a book is, yeah, that's something I think it would take me a while to get to the point where I could do it well.
Thank you. Do you think it's easier to do books, to try and sell books rather than try and sell screenplays?
I don't think it's easier. I think they're both hard.
Okay.
And I think they're both difficult kinds of writing, but I think it, everyone has different strengths. And one of the writers who I worked with on the One of Us is Lying pilot, she's an incredible screenwriter, and she's tried to write books and she just, she can't do it. She doesn't enjoy it, but she's an amazing screenwriter. So it's just, that's sort of how her brain works, her writerly brain. And some people are good at both, but they are both hard, and it's not easy to break into either industry.
Thank you.
I'll add a question onto that kind of aspect, and since that's kind of the way we went to, how much of an influence did you have on the Peacock series? Did you have say in the casting? Did you have say in the writing? I didn't look it up to see if you were any part of the screenplay or any of the production, but I was just curious about that, and if you had any influence on that.
Yeah, not a lot. Especially as a first-time writer, the deal that I made had me as a consultant, which essentially means I had zero decision-making role. I had no say in casting. I did get to see the tapes, so that was kind of fun. And they did give me the opportunity to look at scripts. I was not involved in the big picture discussions about, well, how do we, translate this from book to screen? What do we keep? What do we add? What do we, change? And one of the things I learned going through this process is that I would really like to be part of that. The way I felt was that being a consultant is kind of like if somebody bakes a cake and then they ask for your input on the icing. You can still change the flavor and the appearance of the cake, but the cake is baked. You're not going to fundamentally change that cake. And I would like to be in the room with the recipe. So for the book that I'm working on now that's in development, I'm an executive producer. So with that one, I am part of those early discussions. And that's not a commentary on the show, I think the show is great. It's really just a commentary on the process and how I as a creator feel comfortable. And I feel more comfortable being involved at an earlier stage.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Joe Shanakis. I'm a professor here at ICC and a writer as well. My question was, or is, I guess knowing that you have a PR, marketing, and communication background, I think that's really, really exciting. How do you think, or what did you do in between finishing those edits and the publication of the book, especially for your first book, One of Us is Lying, but also what you've learned since then? What sort of creative efforts do you think you've done that have helped make you successful and made these books successful? Obviously, outside of writing the great stories, and congratulations on all of your success too. But I'm just kind of curious, what other ways did you help get creative with maybe PR or marketing or communication to help get the book out there?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think a lot of people do not realize how much of the marketing for any book falls on an author's shoulders. There are very few authors who get significant PR and marketing support. I get a lot now. I did not get a lot as a debut author. I arranged my own launch event. I didn't tour. I didn't get a book trailer or any of those things. So I focused in a few different areas. And at the time, I was still working full time. So I only had so much time, and I'm a single mom, but I like marketing, I like coming up with sort of taglines. I love the characters. So what I would do was I would sort of come up with these different quotes from the characters, and I would maybe commission an artist to draw the characters. And then I would, put cute little graphics out with the characters, because that to me was a fun thing to do. I also, because I like and value the writing community so much, I got very involved with the writing community on Twitter. I did a writing contest called Pitch Wars, which is very well known in the young adult community. I had tried to get into it before and I didn't. And that just gives you the opportunity to become friendly with lots of other authors who are going to help you promote your book, because you're going to help them promote their book. So authors are one another's biggest cheerleaders. So getting involved in the community is, you know, incredibly helpful. So those were the biggest things that I did. You know, I used my marketing background to come up with what I hoped were fun and interesting factoids about the book that might, you know, intrigue people to learn more. And I really invested a lot in supporting other authors, getting to know other authors, and making sure that they knew all the big milestones in the background of my book, so that if they wanted to, they could do the same for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lynette, I see you have your hand up there, so go ahead.
All right, thank you. So first of all, thank you so much. As a teacher of writing, you've said so many wonderful things that I'm constantly trying to reinforce with students in the classroom about writing being a process, that you have to go through the labor, and that it is intensive, and you can't just write something and be like, here, it's done. But my question for you is, if you could go back in time and tell 8-year-old Karen, right, some things that she could do to make her road to becoming the writer she wants to be, the book writer that she wants to be, what would you tell her so that she could make her journey easier, be better prepared, and become that person more quickly than it took you originally?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I would tell her is, let someone else tell you no. Because I think one of the worst things I did was self-select myself out of the industry. I didn't even try. I never sent anything anywhere. I didn't make any attempt to become a writer. I just decided I wasn't good enough to do it. So, and you know, maybe at that point I wasn't. But the thing is, when I finally tried it, like years and years later, I still wasn't. But because I was trying, I got better. And that's the only way you get better. You know, that's the other thing I tell everybody. It's like, of course you're going to get rejected. Everybody gets rejected. It's not a failure. You know, it's like part of the process, because if you don't put your work out there, you're never going to get feedback, and then you can't improve it. So that is the first one, you know, just don't reject yourself, I guess. But the other is absolutely getting to the point of giving and getting meaningful critique from peers. And, you know, I had no idea how important and helpful that was until I started getting it. And again, it wasn't just getting critique, you know, people telling me what they like and didn't like. It was giving it, you know, it was forcing myself to think, what do I like about this? Why do I like it? You know, how can I help this person take this story to another level that exercises all of these muscles that I didn't even know were necessary to the process?
I have a question. My name is Brian Clark. I'm a librarian here at ICC. I was just curious, so you currently have in this series, you have One of Us is Lying, One of Us is Next, and then you're going to have One of Us is Back. So One of Us is Lying touches on the first four main characters. What made you decide that One of Us is Next was going to go to the next generation, and what combination of that can you give us a clue on what combination of that we'll see in the third book?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I had never intended to write a sequel to One of Us is Lying. I wrote it as a standalone, and that's what I thought it would be. And of course, anytime something does well, people want more of it. You know, my readers wanted more, my publisher also wanted more. And initially I said, no, I think their story is done. But then I started thinking, well, you know, is there another story I could tell? And I had always thought that one of the main characters, has a younger sister who I had always wanted to spend more time with. I thought she had lots of potential, but I didn't have room for her. So I thought, well, what if it's her story, and then who would she be surrounded with? And so, and the story started to take shape because, like, for me, a big part of why I enjoy writing it is because I want the characters to go on a journey, and I want them to be different at the end because of what they've learned through, going through this process and solving this mystery. And with my original 4, I thought, well, they're there. I don't want to unspool all this wonderful learning they did and just put them through their paces again for drama. So I couldn't see myself doing it. But as time went by, more time, and I started thinking about those original characters, I felt like there was more that I had to say for some of them, not all of them. So the 3rd book is a mix of points of view from the 1st book and the 2nd book. And I think, if you think about who probably has the most uncertainty in their life still, you could probably make a pretty good guess as to whose perspectives I'm writing from. But it's a couple characters from One of Us is Lying and one character from One of Us is Next. And again, the goal is for me to feel like I'm bringing something new to them. Like if I'm going to go back into their heads, and I did all that work getting them to where they were at the end of the 1st book, I want to hopefully have it be meaningful for me and also for my readers, that I bring something new to them. And there's drama, but it's not just drama.
Thank you. And thank you for writing these books. I love them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Megan, go ahead.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, I'm Megan Foster Campbell. I'm also a faculty member here at Illinois Central College. And I just had a small question based on something you'd mentioned early on in your presentation. You'd mentioned that you're going to be contributing to sort of a revised, a new take on Miss Marple, and how Agatha Christie in particular inspired you. And I'm just curious to hear from you, what about Christie's writing inspired and influenced you, and how you can see shades or echoes of her style perhaps in your own prose?
Yeah, she was one of the first mystery writers I ever read. I think I read And Then There Were None when I was like maybe 11 or 12 years old. And I still think that's one of the best mysteries I've ever read. It's just the twists get me every time. I'm pretty good at figuring out mysteries at this point in my life, but I rarely saw them coming with Agatha Christie. And she just has a way of sprinkling those red herrings in such a subtle way that you don't realize what they are. And meanwhile, the actual, killer is in the background doing their thing, and she's misdirecting you all the time. And I love that. So that's kind of like the subtlety that I try to bring to my books, is to have so much else going on that it's easy to overlook. What in retrospect hopefully feels obvious. What I love about her books is that it's always surprising, but it also feels like extremely satisfying because everything was there. You just couldn't put it together.
Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm one of the deans here, and one of my areas is criminal justice. So of course I loved the book. But thank you for coming. And not only as a daughter of an English teacher, but someone who loves to write, I want to thank you for, all the things you've said about writing. I know that we're constantly telling the students in, our criminal justice classes and paralegal classes and all those classes that don't have English in the title or writing in the title. Yeah, you too have to write well. And it's not a one and done, and it's a process and it's work. And, we'll use examples of, this will be used in court, or this will be used, in whatever profession. And so, with your permission, I will quote you.
Absolutely.
I quote Dr. Oliver a lot. And of course I've read Joseph's books and I quote him a lot. And, it's that work of, writing well. and it's not always easy, but it's worth it. And it's not just that writing it once and then turning it in. It's the process, and whether it's a novel or what I used to write, which were, exhibits that were going to be in court or
Yeah.
whatever it is. I appreciate the things you've said about the actual writing process, as well as I loved reading the book, of course. So, my background it fit right in. So I appreciate that.
No, I mean, I remember, as a reader reading something and thinking, well, I could never do that. This is so good. It's so polished. It's so all of these things that my work is not, and I did not know that this person wrote 12 drafts, of that novel, probably at least like I do, until I actually went through the process and understood all those different phases that go into it. I mean, if you looked at my first draft of One of Us is Lying, which was solid, for first
Right.
draft, but it night and day from what actually ended up on the shelf. And that was just work, and it was teamwork. It wasn't just me. It was having lots of people, smart people helping me along. And then it was listening to them too.
Well,
Some of the most talented writers I know have a hard time taking critique. And that makes it really difficult to advance your skill.
Yeah, and I appreciated that as well. I think students and us alike all have to realize that, we're going to fail. We got to keep going.
Mhm.
We do a lot of peer review in our courses, and it's hard, but it's worth it. It's worth hearing the critique and giving critique, and that's how they get better. That's how we get better. So I appreciate that insight. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I've got another question, and it kind of ties back to what the question that Megan asked about. How did you keep all in the first book, especially? How did you, or maybe it's with all of them, because I haven't read all of them, I'm sorry. But how do you keep all the plot points straight? How do you make sure that everything got tied up in a nice little bow? I'm imagining a whiteboard somewhere and things like that, but I was just curious if that was how you did that, or if it just was all in your head, or what.
A lot of it's in my head. I'm not that visual of a person. I have friends who do whiteboards and they have like Post-its, and it like looks really cool. And, you get like the red thread practically going from one thing to the other. I don't really do that. A lot of it is in my head. I do the beat sheet formula that I use. It's like an Excel spreadsheet. And so I've kind of modified it for my own use. And I do sort of like chapter by chapter. I have like, whose point of view is it? Like, what's the approximate beat? And not every chapter has a beat, but is it what beat is it closest to? What is it leading up to? And then I have like a couple of different columns for like, what's the big plot point I want to get across here? What's the big character moment I want to get across here? And if the chapter doesn't have at least one of each, then I'm probably doing it wrong, and I have to rethink it. And I sort of do the headlights method of writing, which is that I do have an outline, but it's much, much more detailed in the beginning. And then usually I cycle through points of view. If it's 3 characters, I do chapters 1, 2, 3, and then think, okay, what I learned, like what do I need to adjust down the road because I know these characters better, or I added something, or I realize something's not working all that well. And I just keep doing that until usually like by the midpoint, I'm very detailed, but until I get to that point, it can be a little bit loose sometimes. I'm not always sure how I'm going to get to the end. The end in particular is challenging for me. It's sometimes I know exactly how to get there, and sometimes it takes a few tries.
Okay, thank you. I see Nadine has a question. If you could give me your full name, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Nadine.
Yeah, I'm Nadine Garsali. I'm a student at ICC, and I was wondering, is there any of your characters that you resonate the most with personally, and why?
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of them, actually. I think especially with One of Us is Lying, I sort of like put little pieces of myself into every character, which I think is why they felt so real to me. I was a very ambitious student like Bronwyn, but I was a people pleaser like Cooper. And I definitely sort of had a toxic relationship like Addie, not as dramatic. But I think it's very easy for young women to mistake possessiveness for romantic, and that's what I did. And like Nate, I had people I loved who were dealing with addiction. So all of those kind of came together in that book. So there's always a little something. I would say, and You'll Be the Death of Me, Ivy is a character who I resonated with a lot. She's someone who she works really hard. She's not the smartest girl in the room. At least she doesn't think she is. And she's very conscious of that, but she is always trying to be better, but she doesn't always know the right way to do it. And I really felt like that kind of encapsulated my high school experience.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody else who has any other questions?
A quick comment, if I may. I just want to say thank you for sharing the story about Two Can Keep a Secret, because I think that's just inspiring. And I love everything I've read that you've written, but that's probably my favorite book. And to know that you scratched it twice and restarted and kept going, and that determination, that's amazing to me. I just really thank you for sharing that, because that's very uplifting to think about. Sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah. And, second books are notoriously hard. Everyone says that because it's the first time you're not writing for yourself. You're like writing on deadline, and you're writing and you're thinking about your editor, and you're thinking about your readers. And, is this going to be too similar to what I already did? Is it going to be not similar enough? And there's so many things that you're thinking about that you didn't have to think about before. So it's hard from that respect. And then, for me, I think with One of Us is Lying taking off in an unexpected way, it really sort of froze me a little as well. And I had a lot of self-doubt. So I like to call that the book that made me an author, even though it's not my first book, because I think, if I hadn't forced my way through that, I think publishing is really hard. And that allowed me to believe that I could, make it happen for myself in a way that, I don't think I could have written as many books as quickly as I have if I had not learned that lesson with the second one.
Tobias.
Yeah, hi. I'm Tobias Mitchlick. I'm a student at ICC. And on the same note, I was wondering, you have so many expectations and requirements you have to fill out when you're writing books. But how can you still stay motivated and inspired to write, even when there's like a pressure to just get things done?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, sometimes your deadline is your motivation. You have to write something, and so you sit down and you do it. But that only takes you so far. You really, at least I think, you have to be passionate about what you're doing to create something that is going to be meaningful to other people. So if I start to feel like I'm not being moved by this, and I sort of have this rule, if I haven't cried at least once as I'm writing a book, then something's wrong. It's not doing what it should be doing, because I write about emotional things. I write about big happenings in people's lives. And if I'm not moved by that, I can't expect anyone else to be moved by it. So what I really do is it always goes back to the characters for me. I think, who are these people and why do I care about them? And then by extension, why should other people care about them? And if I care about them enough, like I know I can eventually make you care too. It might just take a few false starts before I get there.
That's interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one last question. I was just curious, what drew you into writing young adult fiction rather than shooting for a different audience range?
I think it was because I was impacted so much by The Hunger Games, which of course is a young adult novel. And it was a really interesting experience being as affected by that book as I was, because I have read other books that I loved, and I remember thinking, oh, I love this book. And then sometimes I would think immediately after, I could never write this book. And The Hunger Games was the first time where I thought, I love this book and I could do something like this book. There was something about the young adult voice about going on that journey with Katniss, you know, of like who she was and who she became and who she wanted to be, that just really, really resonated with me. And then I started reading more young adult because I was not all that familiar with the category at the time. It was the first young adult book I'd read probably since I was a young adult. And I was so impressed with the work that's being done in the space and how dynamic it is and how diverse it is. And so I started getting very passionate about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Any last minute questions? Because we are at almost time here. So.
Yeah, I have a question actually really quickly. My name is Shelby Fortney. I'm a student at ICC. And I was just wondering, since you have the same agent as the author who wrote The Hunger Games, you might have had a chance to meet her. How was it to meet the author that basically inspired you to start writing again?
I have not had the chance to meet her. If only, you know, she's very like, you know, she's just sort of does her own thing. She doesn't go to events. She doesn't like speak publicly. So I've just never had the opportunity. I did get a slightly early copy of her newest book, but I would say it was maybe 3 days before it was on shelves as I got mine. So yeah, maybe someday. That's still on my bucket list that we'll get to meet one of these days.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm actually a little amazed by that. But anyway, well, if nobody else has any last minute questions, I would like to thank you very much, Karen, for being here today. We appreciate this so much. This was a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate you taking the time out. I appreciate all of our attendees coming here today, and be on the lookout for that feedback form in a few minutes. So
Yeah,
thank you
so much
again.
for
So
having me
much.
and for
Thank
all the
you.
great questions. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So
Bye.
have a
Bye.
good
Have a great
evening,
day.
everybody.
Yep. Thanks again.